Okay, guys, thank you for being here today. We have Mandy with At Recovery with Mandy. Mandy is a recovery coach in addiction. She is in recovery herself. She's a former addict, also a victim of narcissistic abuse and stalking. So I asked her to come be here today to give us her thoughts and ideas about all of those topics, and she has a lot to offer us. So thank you very much, Mandy, for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. My mission is to bring out the stalking victims because I just want so badly for there to be a community like that they feel safe in.
Tell me about Recovery with Mandy first, your Instagram profile.
I started that in 2013 because I got sober August 6, 2012. Prior to that, I grew up with my parents are still married after almost 50 years, like in love, madly in love. Like my dad set the bar very high. I was part of like youth groups and mission trips. And like, I grew up with zero trauma, drinking, no drugging, nothing like that. I've been singing since I could like talk. And so I got a full ride to college and was planning on going to Nashville. I had like my whole life just like set big goals. And one day I was singing in the classroom and go figure, a guy walked in. He was my very first love. Right when the toxicity started, obviously, it was breakup on and off and whatever. And then I ended up breaking my promise and got pregnant my very first time that I had sex, and I had an abortion. During that time, that procedure was, I don't know how to explain it. I was so trauma bonded to him that I loved him more than I loved myself, and that I loved the child growing inside of me. It was back in the day when clinics were rioted, and it was a pretty traumatic thing. I ended up going through that, and he cheated on me. And from there, I dropped out of college. I started drinking and partying. And from there, I was very much an alcoholic at that point and, found things that would numb me. Ended up having a one-night stand with a sperm donor and have my son now. I got pregnant with him. There was a girl that we'll just call her S. S was like literally my partner in crime. And she taught me how to be a criminal. She taught me how to sell drugs. She taught me how to, to use them properly, to med seek properly. So I became very good at manipulation. So from there, I ended up, when I did get pregnant, I did stop using. I lasted about 2 weeks after I had my son. I was involved with crack, and I got set up on a blind date by S with a person that worked in the prison. He was a guard, a sergeant there, and he was a not so nice guy. And I was very lippy back because I was a full-blown addict at that point, and very toxic, very physical, very violent. I did everything to numb the pain, and I never put sperm donor on anything. He chose not to be a part. I just didn't want the freaking hassle, to be honest. I was not this person, and I wouldn't change anything in that aspect either. But the night that I put Mason to bed, I dyed my hair, and I took my nightly ritual of pills. I added a fentanyl patch that night, and I ended up overdosing. I was dyeing my hair, and I must have gotten in the bathtub or the shower to like rinse it out. And next thing I know, I woke up to Mason, and he was 7 at the time. I had already put him to bed, so the fact that he was up is literally a miracle. Mason actually shut the water off before I drowned in the bathtub that night. And so I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him, truly, physically. I remember that look. I remember that look very much, and it still gets me very emotional. But that look never get out of my head, like ever. And he just looked down at me, and he's 7. Mason was the adult through and through. I remember him looking down that night, and he asked, what do I do? Who do I call? And I had enough wits about me that I knew, with nobody listed on the birth certificate but me, the drug addict, he'd be placed in the care of CPS, and my parents would have to fight to get him out. My parents have been the only consistent in his life until I got sober. I said, don't call the police. He accidentally called my in-laws instead of my ex-husband at the time. And they called my parents and, threatened to come and get him. We're going to call CPS. And so they did. My parents came and got him. I fractured my femur on the way down in the bathtub. And so I ended up going to the hospital for, more drugs. I had a reason now. And the very next day, my dad called and he said, and bring her to me. He told my ex. He gathered all of my stuff, like all of it, like in a brown paper bag. And I threw barbecue chicken at him, no joke, and from a crock pot. I was so mad that because I was sick, I was taking up to 60 Norco a day, and that on top of other things, just to maintain my detox and my withdrawals. So I needed that. Like, I was sick every 7 minutes. If I didn't take it, I was sick. And so he wouldn't. And then my dad wouldn't give it to me. And it took us a long ass time to get 45 minutes there. And I looked over at my dad, and for the first time in, 30 some years, I watched him put his head down. And it was a rude awakening that I was going to die. And I had accepted that fact. Like, I was good with it. My recovery coaching, I talk about something called the click. Uh-huh. And there was something in that jail cell. There was a guard, and I used to do drug and alcohol testing, ironic, right, for the Department of Transportation. So one of them happened to be working, and he said, I recognize you. And he said, why did you go to rehab before you came here? It was then at that moment that it clicked for me. I knew what I was going to be doing. And I knew that I was in recovery from that moment, and that lifestyle was no longer an option for me. I walked out of there, and I had a lot of court shit that I had to do. I had 2 years probation. My probation officer kept me accountable for everything. You want to talk about accountability partner? Get yourself a freaking PO. They'll do it every time. I went to meetings. I was court ordered to 3 meetings a week, and that was my journey. I know a lot of people, Yeah, AA, and I went to NA too, because I was a drug addict and an alcoholic. I got sober, and 10 months in, I'm at an AA meeting, and that glorious saying that they say, do not get into a relationship within your first year of being sober. Mm-hmm. There is a reason for that, I promise. Because at 10 months sober, I had my next walk in. I'll never forget even what he was wearing, what I was wearing. And I'll never forget looking over at the girl sitting next to me and saying, I'm going to marry that one. So I became the 13th stepper, and then the one that sought out the narc.
So you met him in AA?
I did. And AA, you share a lot of very personal things, that have happened in your past, and things that you're ashamed of, and things that, that it's called an anonymous program, Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, for a reason. It's because you're not to share that information. Mm-hmm. And he used that stuff actually against me in many fights, towards like the end and even in the middle. We actually ended up eloping, and I hit 1 year, because my sponsor was like, absolutely not. You know, you have to be 1 year. And I was like, okay. So I got my chip on my 1 year and I went on a date with him. And, you know, just, and now that I see it, I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
there's so much. Like, I'm like, oh, like, I know you saw that, girl. So we went on our first date, and he was actually with somebody, and she tried to warn me. And I literally said the words that every main supply, goes to is, you don't love him like I love him, and I can fix him, and I know him the best. Like, I'm sorry it didn't work out for you, but you're the crazy ex.
Right.
We ended up eloping, and my family, they were not there. Only his was allowed to be there. We got married at the courthouse. I wasn't even going to tell my parents. Everything was so shady and done under, the table. It was so many red flags from the very beginning. My son wasn't there. Like, all of that guilty stuff that we carry around, it just is a constant therapy session,
Right.
I'll never forget, like, he had his license taken away because, I mean, this is no secret, and I say it all the time. If he doesn't like any of the shit that I'm about to say, he shouldn't have freaking done it, okay? Just saying. And I have evidence to back it all up. So bring it, is all I have to say. So that is my disclaimer. I remember him, he was not supposed to be driving. He actually has like 9 felonies and like 30 some misdemeanor, like ridiculous criminal record, and most of them being from alcohol. He was never into drugs. He sold them at one point back in the, like, way before I knew, like high school stuff and whatever. He was a very violent drunk. We did sweeps, like, we became masters at doing sweeps of what to expect. And I called it Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde because we never knew which one we were dealing with. If it was vodka, who, then, we knew what to expect. If it was, yeah, whiskey, it was so bad. There's so many 911 calls, so many. I'll never forget, he broke my nose just sitting there out of nowhere, just the violent stuff that he did. And then it was always followed with like these huge bouquets and these lovely cards, and he had the most beautiful handwriting, and he was an artist, he could do anything. Like, he literally was so good at everything. Anything he touched was gold.
What was his profession?
A con man.
Oh.
But really, he didn't work. That was the thing. It was always these ideas, and I would pour all of my money. I was the cash cow. I was the ATM. Financial abuse has always been his main source of abuse, and not because he held on to it. I actually had control of that part of it, oddly enough. But that was a fight every day. Literally every day, that was a fight. But I refused because getting sober, my credit was already, shit, and I wanted it good. I wanted to buy a home. That's been my goal since I got sober. That's the only thing I've ever wanted, is to buy a home. And I got almost there. Everything, I was with him for 8.5 years. I filed for divorce. COVID hit 2020. He did have a job for a short time at a local store. He ended up taking the COVID pay, and I was working from home. We worked all through COVID. My company did. And that was a lot of recovering addicts and people in recovery, or people that were actively using, getting stimulus checks, all of that kind of good stuff. So it was a very difficult time, very stressful. And it was a war zone in our house, because in Michigan, I don't know about other places, but in Michigan, we could go outside and go for walks, but like, you were not allowed on the roads. If you were driving, you were pulled over. Like, there had to be a legit reason of why. Yeah, it was really bad. Like, we were on lockdown, and you could go for walks, but if you've seen people, like, you would put your mask on. Some very odd behavior that began, and I couldn't put my finger on it because he had always chosen alcohol. I've never, in all of the 8 years I knew him, I did not ever know him to try anything else or to do anything else. Not one time. Night after a meeting, I came home and he was staying up late, and it was like, and now that I see it, it's like, I mean, duh, I see it every day, you know, but came home from a meeting one night, and I walked into the garage, and there was plastic. If you've ever seen Dexter, it's like it was like a kill room, but it's a trap house is basically what it was. And for somebody in recovery from drugs, that was a trigger. But also, I knew the second I walked in there, and everything was like, I mean, like, the door was made out of this cardboard, like Ziploc, like, I can't even explain. It was so messed up. And he had drilled holes because he was so paranoid. He had drilled holes in, like, the garage all over to see where I was going to be, if people, like, where the door, like, it was very calculated in all of his decision making throughout that. I walked in, and I knew, I felt my stomach drop, and I knew it, and I still didn't want to believe it, you know, and I walked in, and I was like, there's something not right. He's on something. Right. I know what he's on. I just, you know, now what, you know? The very next morning, I go into the bathroom, and there was a bag, a little baggie, and got in there before Mason was supposed to. Otherwise, Mason would have found it.
Yeah.
I took a picture of it, and I sent it to him at work. And I said, "What is this?" He said, "Are you in the garage?" I tore through that shit like nobody's business. I did it. I'm talking, I went through there like a rage room, found pipes and bags and shit just stuffed in between fences and nooks and crannies. And I asked him, "Is it yours?" Nope. He would get like pretty violent about it. And he was like the Hulk on steroids, and it turned him in for meth possession. I turned in every bag. I filed 12 police reports. I had to go in for a surgery. Knew it was coming up. He had caused an accident for me to fall off my bike, and I was in a cast. I had surgery. I broke several bones, stopped going to physical therapy, and I do my stuff in the gym. And I had tried to go no contact. I started to see a therapist, and it wasn't safe. He was still in the house, and it wasn't safe for me to write the stuff down. I had started in a journal. He found it. That was World War III. It was not good. And he actually went through and hacked into my email account. We were married, so that was everybody's excuse. I turned him in for the meth. And then during COVID, he signed my name and the retainer under my name and used my stimulus check out of my bank account. We were married. So afterwards, I got sued for his meth possession because he refused to pay the bill. Oh, and gosh. Yeah. And I could fight it, but we were married. That's what the lawyer told me. So he took credit cards out in my name. So I filed for divorce June of 2021. In Michigan, they make you wait like 3 months in case you change your mind, which is so stupid because they only let you make 3 days to get married. Flip that shit around. Right. Yeah. In case you change your mind. I was like, no, I'm pretty positive. Like, let's get this shit on. Let's get this moving. Yeah. February 12th, he got picked up and charged for the meth possession of 2021. And then he left later on that month. So that left March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October. So that was a little over 7.5 months that he stalked. And when he left the house, it was only because he stuck his arm in the window and I bit his arm. Like I did. He grabbed my wrist and I was like, that's it. I want you to leave. And he left and he never came back, like, to stay. Like, his stuff was out of the house immediately. I changed everything, like with my landlord and all of that. By that time, my neighbors had already pitched a big fit and had already gone to the police station and filed reports, all of them, the entire block, that they wanted all of us. They even included the dog's name, Mac, to be evicted. I was like, that's just rude. Okay. Because it was drug activity in the house.
Oh, yeah.
But, my landlord went to bat and was like, I had no idea. I filed for divorce right away. And or in June, I'm sorry, February, March, April, May, June. Yeah, so I ended up, it took me about 3 months to do that with my therapist's help, almost 4, to file for divorce. And then I had a surgery in August and I was stuck. My son got COVID, we were quarantined, and the stalking began when I filed for divorce. He believed that there was actually a chance for us. He sent, hundreds of messages an hour. An hour. He would sit at the park because he was homeless.
Wow.
He would sit at the park or wherever and just send messages after messages, and they would be nice and then mean and then nice and then mean. I was still trauma bonded, so there was times that I'd pick it up and I'd hear him crying on the other end, and then he'd flip it and he would, call me like a ruthless bitch, that I had ruined his life, and if it wasn't for me, he wouldn't be using, and he wasn't using. It's all in my head, to the point where I believed just most of it. My therapist would be like, that's not the truth. That's not the case. That's not what happened. Like, this is real. Get back in reality,
Right.
He drained all of my accounts, Facebook and escort dating services.
Oh.
He sent me, oh my God, videos of him and other chicks. Some of them, they were consumers. He preyed on them. He was using with them and he sold to them. It was one thing after another. He'd be knocking on my window. I never slept. I was always looking over my shoulder. I went to church, and he would be right there and he'd say, hey, can I get in here? And here I am shouting in church, you can't sit with us. I sounded crazy.
Yeah.
On October 26th, I watched him walk out of the courtroom, and they had adjourned it again because COVID, and he was fighting it. I watched him walk out of that courtroom, Amy, and I watched him put on his leather jacket, and I watched him look at me, put on those sunglasses, and light that cigarette and smirk. And I sat there and I just shook. And I knew this was going to be my life if I didn't stop. I can't explain what he did. He stole my peace.
Mm-hmm.
He stole the comfort of my own home. I had to relocate. And then I redacted all of my information with the court. After I seen him smirk after he walked out, I just knew that it was going to get bad. Like, I drove right over to the police station. And I said, I'm not leaving here until somebody listens to me. And I have proof. I have proof of everything. And I need somebody that will take the time. I sat with this police officer for 2.5 hours. And he took down everything. And I spent the next 2 days emailing at just 60 days of evidence. Turned in enough evidence that they were looking at 3 to 12 years. And October 26th, he called me from the jail. They revoked his bond and picked him up on stalking charge. So that was like a really big ordeal to have that done. When they picked him up on the stalking charge, he called me from the jail. And even though they said there's a no contact order, and he called me from the jail and said, please tell me you're not going to be with another man. Like, just please tell me. And he's crying, like, please just tell me. And I just, like, I knew it was recorded. It was like, I do not want you to contact me again. Do you understand when I say do not ever call me again. I do not want to hear from you again. And I made that very clear in that call because it was recorded. Mm-hmm. And then I hung up and I called the prosecutor and I said, he just called from the jail. And they're like, what? And I'm like, I told you, he's freaking crazy. Like, nobody's listening to me, you know? Within 24 hours, his mom had bailed him out. When I found that out, when I seen released on that thing, the police were patrolling that night. Like, they already knew. Mm. But I spent an hour and a half that night, the second that I found out he was released, and I legit just started talking every hundreds of burner numbers and Facebook profiles. And at 12:03 that morning, I got 2 banana peel emojis. I was always like, that was a secret code from us, you know, which, you know, we slip on a peel, don't talk. And that was just our thing.
Why did you unblock him?
Because I knew his MO. I've told them everything that's going to happen. Like, because I know him. I know what he's, you know, his relapses, all of that stuff. Like, he's been incarcerated more times than we've been together, you know, like, yeah. Honestly.
Okay, so you were trying to catch him in the act again. Mm-hmm. To go back.
Oh, I knew he was going to reach out because he hadn't stopped, you know. And finally I reached out and I said, you know, I then reached out to the police and I said, I got him. He did it. And they're like, no way. And I'm like, yep, I printed that shit out. And then we went to court. They picked him up on aggravated stalking then. Wow. And yep. And he had a cash bond that was pretty hefty. He's a 4th habitual offender. So, you know, his track record isn't great. He drug it through court for 7 whole months. I told nobody where I was going. And my parents actually helped me move so that I was safe.
Did it stop?
The stalking, yes. The feeling, no. I know that he's around. I know that my son has seen him. I'm in fight or flight mode at all times. I wear my necklace everywhere. I find myself isolating. Yes, it's gotten, you know, the stalking he's left me alone for right now, but I've never been able to escape that part of it.
Can you talk about the necklace more in case people don't know what you're referring to?
This is Invisaware. But if you press that twice, some people put it in their scrunchie, you know, if they're at the gym, you know, stuff like that. App that you download on your phone. I have just the basic. I didn't go premium because, you know, it's not necessary for me, to each their own. But it does the exact same thing. It is through ADT, and I did try it out with our 911 here. When you press the back, hit it, you know, twice, it will actually alert 5 of my contacts with my location. They then try to then get a hold of you, you know, and then it also alerts ADT. You have 1.5 minutes between the time that you touch this to the time that it goes to 911. They will constantly send you text messages asking if this is a test, please, you know, press it and enter in the code. Actually, you can pick it for medical. I picked mine for domestic violence. So when it actually gets to 911, if it should ever get there, uploads like his name, the case number, his PO. I added marks, anything, you know, that would identify him, family members, their telephone numbers, anything that I could add in there that would track him down. I made sure to do that. So
that's pretty cool. And how much is something like that?
It was $250. So it was a little bit more expensive, but I will tell you, it's worth that peace of mind. Mm-hmm. That's for sure.
Given the stalking and everything, as far as the trauma bond goes, and you know how it's really hard for us to detach from the person who's hurting us. Did you find that you also struggled with that?
Oh yeah. When you say detach, I immediately go into detox, because I just like I detoxed from my drug, you know, my drugs and my alcohol. I had to I'm constantly detoxing from him. I was addicted to him. That's what a trauma bond is it's a bond that's formed, which is the same thing. My substances, my pills were my best friend. I had a very committed relationship with them. And so, you go through almost the same, the withdrawals, even though it's a substance leaving your body, and I will definitely say it's different, but you still go through like very similar, things. I still experience like the fatigue, there's days where I'm so sad and so, oh, it makes me want to even cry, like talking about it, because it's so real, just so grief stricken that I just don't know what to do with myself, So yeah. I think that trauma bond is never, I don't know, maybe I'm speaking out, but for me, like my addiction, it's waiting there for me, like it will take me back at any time, right? Because it wants misery, it wants death, and it wants to kill me. So does my narc. my narcissist, uses a love bomb, which is the same dopamine, it's right. Just a synthetic dopamine that I'm putting into my system, right? So yeah, I definitely experienced the trauma bonding. I'm more aware of it. So I think that it's easier to recognize that, that it's there and that the possibility is very much there.
Did you find that you applied a lot of the same skills that you used to become sober from alcohol and drugs while you were going no contact?
Absolutely. They say in recovery, they tell you, change people, places, and things, right? The same goes when you're going no contact. You don't hang around with flying monkeys. You change people, places, things for your peace, to stay sober. And for me to stay in remission, I need to remove myself from the prison, because, prisoners don't hang out. Once you've been released, they don't hang out in prisons anymore, or they don't even hang out in the freaking courtyard or anywhere near. They want the hell away from there, as far away as possible. Mm-hmm. But there's a comfort in that escape almost. I definitely think that I work at it daily. I work at my sobriety daily. I've been sober for 10 and a half years, but that does not mean that I'm not whipping out some coping skills, because during the stalking, I wanted to use. I legit told my best friend, like, what in the hell am I sober for? Like, I picked a fine freaking time to be sober now, like, what would be great right now is a bottle of wine, but no, I have to be an alcoholic, these were things that I kept saying. I was mad that I was an addict at the same time, but I'm an addict in every sense, when it comes to relationships. That's why when you want to break the cycle of addiction, you're rewiring your brain to learn how to cope without a substance, right? Without learning how to cope without it.
That's true.
And so when we go no contact, we are legit trying to rewire our brains to cope without what we know. And that's all that we know.
So I have a question about your Instagram page and how all that ties into your story. I mean, you were stalked and you're still fearful of this person. What gives you the motivation to go public and do what you're doing?
I had posted something on TikTok, which I ended up making that private, because Instagram seems to be more personable to me, like where you can, I could monitor it better, better. Yeah. So, I had posted a video and on TikTok, and she reached out to me on Instagram on one of my reels, and she said, "This is so random and I don't know you, but I just want you to know that I have a group of ladies that it's okay with you. I'd like to pray for you. Like, I just feel this gravitation towards you." And she was just so like, I don't know why I trusted her. I was like in the beginning stages of like the healing, and she said these three words, and it literally changed everything. So I went from being like a completely like sobriety, type page to like, oh shit, like you're in recovery from like a lot more, honey. But she said, I believe you. And that is what changed everything. So this journey that I've been on with Instagram has been the only place that I honestly have shared like everything from start to finish when it comes to my past relationship. I go to meetings for my sobriety because I want to be around like-minded people. That's what I'm hoping, happens, is that we just keep meeting like-minded people, and we connect on levels that only we can understand, and that's a community. Like, that's support.
When I, decided to do this no contact thing, I just felt so alone. No one got it. Everyone in my world just was like, what is so hard about this? Just be done. It's that simple. Move on. Chip, chop, chip. You're done. Like, but it doesn't work that way.
No.
And it's actually like detrimental to me. Like, it doesn't help me leave faster. It actually, it doesn't help. And so but what does help is being around people that get, for someone who is struggling, like perhaps they're still relatively new to no contact. And I would consider anything within a couple years new still, because, it's taken a lifetime to become who we are. There's a reason why we accepted that abuse. It's not going to be an overnight process to go no contact. It's not as easy as saying I'm done, right? Because if it's a real trauma bond, there's an addiction there happening, and that is going to come with detox, withdrawal, and all this stuff. So what would you say is the most helpful thing you found, or what's a good piece of advice for people that are stuck and they're having trouble with this no contact journey?
I would have to say, tighten up your circle. Tighten it up. And when I say, even if it's for a brief moment, tighten it up to the point where you can have an accountability person in your life that's going to tell you not what you want to hear, but what you need to hear. Reach out. That I tell people that in recovery, like, reach out if you're struggling. If you have a craving to use a drug, they always say that the phone weighs 1,000 pounds. The same is that you're going to crave that drug of a person, and just know that there are coping skills that you're going to have to figure out, whether it's journaling, whether it's, lighting off a Chinese lantern. I made a personal rage room. Like, I did. I destroyed that garage like nobody's business. And I put tarps down and bought stuff from Goodwill and like glasses and stuff, and literally made a rage room.
Wow.
Do whatever. Yeah. And I found like kayaking, I connected with nature, try new things, find a coping skill, because that is what's going to get you through. Pour yourself into the survivor pages, because you're going to find just so much motivation there, and so much, I don't know, maybe contentment with knowing that you're not alone. That craving will pass. It takes 5 to 7 minutes for a craving to pass, a real intense one. It gets very intense. And so if you can busy your hands, because they say idle hands make for idle time, and idle time makes for a relapse. And think of it like that if you go back, that is a relapse, and then it's like starting over again. And then you carry that guilt, and it's just that cycle all over. So Mason is not his. I want to make that very clear, but he did call him stepdad. And, him having to heal from that, because he's he's 17. I educate him. I don't keep him in the dark about things. My addiction, he lived through that with me, so I make him a part of my recovery because he was a part of my addiction, and I believe that there's positive reinforcement. And the same goes with the narc abuse. He was peeking out the window one day and he said, he's like a serial killer that hasn't killed anybody yet.
Oh, wow.
Watching him heal from that has been so working on that mom guilt and like that parent guilt of like, look at the evil that you brought into your life. I think that that's something that's like super important too to talk about, is that, you have to give yourself grace, because that trauma bond, man, they're good. They're so good, so giving ourselves grace, as hard as that is, and realizing like that there is hope. There really is. There's freaking hope out there. And I just hope that we show that. I hope that somebody can relate and say, like, I left because of them. I'll never get the closure that I deserve. And that's okay.
Mandy, thank you so much for being here today. For any of you watching, Mandy's Instagram is Recovery with Mandy. So please go follow her. If you are a victim of stalking or you suspect that you are dealing with that, Mandy is a great resource for you. And she has offered to, be there for anybody that needs any kind of assistance or direction with that. So please make sure you reach out to her if you need any help at all. Thank you, Mandy, so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yay!